Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We might make a start. So I'll do a quick sound check. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a lot to get through today. We're going to be sorting out everything you need for Summit 1. And also Farzad's also organised some workshops. And he and I will be doing those, I think, on Monday. So there's some workshops coming up as well. But we're basically going to be covering what we're covering today, as far as I know, or there might be extras, I don't know. It's up to Farzad to organise. But certainly what we're going through today is going to be the same sort of stuff we're going to do in the workshops, I think. Okay, so we're now in that week. And we did all the GUI and Event Handling stuff last week, apart from a bit of JSlider stuff, really. There's some other things as well that I was going to talk about this week. For example, I was going to show you some advanced Lambda examples. Let's not get sidetracked. We'll cover those later if we need them for this course. At this stage, you don't need them, so let's leave out the advanced Lambda stuff. I've got a JSlider example coming up. We talked about, one of the slides last week mentioned an input combo box, input dialog with a combo box. Let's leave that till later if we need it. Pop-up menus, when you right-click and you get pop-up menus, I said we'd cover that next week, but let's leave it and see if we need it. Okay, and anything else. So the other things last week I said we'd look at this week, and I've decided against it. Let's focus on the Summit 1. I've realised how far people need to go with the Summit 1. So this class really is devoted to that. We've got 7 people now. 7, that's great. So what I propose we do is we'll, and I'm assuming everybody's read the assignment spec. If you haven't read the assignment spec, oh well, you're not going to get very much out of today. You'll probably find a lot of today confusing, so hope you read the spec. We're going to do a quick walkthrough. I'm going to show you how to read the question and highlight keywords. Very important skill. We'll talk a little bit about storyboards, and I'll show you some of my very draft and incomplete storyboards. We'll talk about divide and conquer. We'll get Pseudo Code to map stuff out, and I'll get you guys to participate and write some code, some Pseudo Code for some of the functionality that's required. Okay, we've got some storyboards coming up. Okay, so let's start by having a quick look at the spec. And so this isn't my one. This is just another one I've opened up just for today's class. My one's got highlights all through it and comments all through it and all that sort of stuff, which is what you should be doing when you read a spec. Okay, so I'm going to do some color coding here. Implement object-oriented programming using modern programming language. Build an interactive software application using GUI interface. So we need a GUI. This to be a GUI application, not a console application. Your task is to write a GUI. There it is again, the magic word GUI. We did 2 weeks of GUI programming in the last course, and we've done 1 week so far in this course. So we've done 3 weeks of GUI programming. So you must provide your client with a complete GUI desktop application that satisfies all the requirements described in the spec below. So Queensland Transport to road users. This service is dedicated to collecting, storing, manipulating. So collecting, storing, manipulating, and making available motor vehicle registration information important to deliver of services to Queensland road users. Each motor vehicle can have only one owner, and will have a unique identifier, which is a plate number. So each vehicle, as we're talking about here, each vehicle assigned by the system. Okay, so each vehicle has got a unique identifier, which is a plate number assigned by the system. Okay, the system is used by Queensland RTA staff to create, edit, and search for records. Okay, the system should have the ability to add or update or change the vehicle and owner information. So we're going to be able to add and update vehicle and owner information. So just that first paragraph there tells us a lot. Okay, so create, edit, search is the sort of things we should be thinking about. And in this assignment, it's just the ability to add and change information and a little bit of searching. Okay, and we've got the two key bits of data we need to keep track of: vehicles and owners. Okay, so this single paragraph here explains a lot. Highlight the keywords and then you can start understand things a lot better. So there's two types of vehicles. So two types. There's private and corporate. And each owner must have all or some of the following information. So we're talking about owners here. And there's an ID, an ABN, date of birth, first name, last name, address, and phone number. And date of birth is only required for private owners, and Australian business numbers only required for corporate owners. So you've got two types of owner there. So we've got a vehicle, we've got an owner class or an owner object with common fields, which is ID, ID, first name, last name, address, phone number. And we've got specific fields depending on the type of vehicle, ABN and date of birth. So as soon as you read that, you should twig, that sounds like those inheritance hierarchies we're talking about back in week 4 and so on. Okay, week 3, week 4. And when we had employees and managers, and we had manager with a bonus. So we've got two types of vehicle, or two types of owner, sorry. Two types of owner. So you should be thinking immediately inheritance hierarchy there. Okay. So here's vehicles now. So we've got talked about owners now. We've got vehicles. We've got motorcycles, light vehicles, and heavy vehicles. So we've got 3 types of vehicles. Again, you should be twigging, inheritance hierarchy. I've got to apply what I've learned. Inheritance hierarchy. Okay. So each vehicle's got its own plate number, which is that one that's auto allocated by the system that we talked about up here. Unique plate number assigned by the system. Okay, so that's the auto allocate field. And then for heavy vehicles, we've got the load capacity. For light vehicles, we've got the number of seats. And otherwise, we've got the engine capacity, make, model, year, and owner ID. Okay, so vehicles and owners are the 2 types of data we need to keep track of. And each one of those types of data have got their own subtypes. So everything we've done, polymorphism, inheritance, GUI programming, everything we've done so far is going to apply to this assignment. The system should be developed using good practices, OOP, Java, commenting, all that sort of stuff. So commenting, proper names, inheritance, encapsulation. Encapsulation is to do with hiding complexity. And it should be Java desktop application, which is already said, and so on. So some of the functionality, or the functionality for this assignment is we want to be able to create new owners, create new vehicles, search and display existing owners, edit existing owner, search and display vehicle, and edit existing vehicle, and a clear button, and an exit button, and so on. So we're going to be mapping some of these out shortly. Okay, I'll come back to these shortly. But these are the sorts of either menu options or buttons you're going to need to provide to your user. Those 8 things, you need to provide buttons for those. And all input data must be validated. So error messages are displayed if something's not correct. So improper data type, length, range, and so on. Your program must use inheritance, So we've got a generic vehicle class, and then 2 derived classes or subclasses. Okay, so it's mapping out exactly what you need to do. A generic owner class, and then 2 derived classes or subclasses, which are individual and corporate owner. And your program can use other classes as you need. So if you need other classes, add them in. But that's your basic design. You'll also need a GUI class, of course, for handling your GUI, and that will make use of these other classes.
Would we use motorcycle subclass?
Sorry, is that a question?
Yeah.
I can hardly hear you. Sorry.
Would we use a motorcycle subclass?
Yes. So these are all subclasses. Now, motorcycle is interesting because it doesn't have any specific data here that makes it unique. Okay, so it's going to be a subclass with nothing really in it. But who knows what assignment 2 is going to do? We don't know where the future is going yet. So assignment 2 might have specific requirements for motorcycle. Okay, so you're making a subclass now. Two derived subclasses are light and heavy. Okay, so maybe for Summit 1, then you can leave out the motorcycle type. If it's just a vehicle without being one of these subtypes, you can assume it's a motorcycle. But just keep that in mind for Summit 2. You might need to make your own motorcycle subclass. Okay, so you can either do it or not, depending on whether you want to or not. But the motorcycle class will have nothing new in it. It'll just be extends vehicle, and this be a straight copy of vehicle at this stage. But I don't know where Summit 2 is going. So, okay, so the user should be able to enter more than one vehicle or owner details at a time. And what that means, of course, is not so you can't enter 50 motor vehicles at a time. It means enter one vehicle at a time, but be able to store them all. It means so you're storing them all in an array or an array list. It suggests array lists there. So not stored in a database. Therefore, each time fresh data should be entered to test the system. So we're not storing the data in a database or a file. So as soon as we exit our program, it's going to forget all the data. That's fine. Again, we're thinking about a Summit 2. We'll probably add file IO. Okay, makes sense, doesn't it? So Summit 1's not complete. A Summit 2 will be more complete. There's some of the data validations you need to do. Names should only contain alphabets or alphabetic characters separated by space. Phone can contain alphanumerics. In other words, letters and numbers. Date of birth can contain alphanumerics. Plate numbers can be alphanumeric. You should include default parameterized and copy constructors. The get and set methods, toString, and so on. Okay, so the only one of those we haven't seen yet is this copy constructor, which we'll go over today as well. Code quality, comment headers on all your files, comments, meaningful variable names, all that sort of stuff, all the useful stuff you're used to doing for your classes. Keep your code nice and neat, all that sort of stuff. And I say submission and marking guide. So there's the bulk of the assignment. So we've got two types of data here, and some functions that we need to be able to do on that data. So interestingly, there's no way to save the data or load the data from file. There's no way to list all the vehicles for an owner. Okay, so you might be thinking there's a lot of stuff missing here. Maybe it's coming in assignment 2. Okay, we don't know yet. So thinking about storyboards, so that's the sort of thing I was thinking for that you might want to do. So you'll have an owner section where you can create, edit, and whatever else you want to do with owners. And then a vehicle section where you can create and edit and whatever you want to do with vehicles. And there'll be buttons in there for each one, owner and vehicle buttons. And you might have a panel which is to do with all the owner input fields. We got owner name and date of birth and whatever else. And you'll have some data entry boxes maybe, or radio buttons or whatever makes sense. And then at the bottom there, you'll have a save button. Okay. And same for vehicles. We have all the vehicle data entry fields, whatever they might be. Whatever makes sense, combo boxes, radio buttons, check boxes, text fields, whatever makes sense. And then the save button. And all of these things might be disabled. Okay, and we know how to do that because we know about the set enabled method. Okay, so all of these things might be disabled, but if the user clicks the create owner button, maybe this panel here becomes enabled so that all these fields become enabled and the save button becomes enabled. Okay, and so again, it's just set enabled. You might need to do it for the panel, or you might need to do it for the individual fields and buttons that you want to enable. It's up to how your code works. Okay, but it's just simple commands, set enabled. And if you want to change that heading, or if you want to change any of the labels, you could use set text to change the label. So if they click edit owner, that heading could say edit owner. Okay, so you have different things happening depending on which button they click. You can also use set visible if you want to hide or show anything. Set visible, set enabled, set text. So it's just those 3 simple commands to show and hide things and enable things and disable things. I'd suggest if the user clicks the create owner button, that this all this panel here becomes live, and all of these buttons over here get turned off. Okay, so the user can't click any more of these buttons here over this side until they click the save, until the save is successful. And then the save would, if everything's valid, if all the data's valid, it would add the data to the array, validate it, all that sort of stuff. And if everything's valid and saved properly to the array, this panel will then be disabled and these buttons would be enabled again. Okay, so again, by careful use of set enabled, you can make it so that when the user does something, they've got to finish it before they can go back and do something else. And you might have a save or cancel button. If they click the cancel, then any data, you say, are you sure you want to cancel? And then if they say yes, then you could set everything to disabled over here again and re-enable the buttons over here to let them to do whatever else they want to do. Okay, so maybe it's not just save, maybe it's save and cancel. Okay, so that sort of design there is very simple. You've got no multiple frames, you've got no multiple, you don't have to worry about tabs or card layout or anything like that. You can have everything all on in the one screen. It's nice and simple. Okay, just using stuff we've built already, J panels, J labels, J text fields, whatever, J buttons. So it's a nice simple design. And if you need to change your headings, if the user clicks edit vehicle, you could easily set that text to edit vehicle to change it. So each of these buttons here, you could set things up before they, and then go on to enable the fields that need to be enabled. If you're editing an owner, you might display a list of owners. And if the user selects one, then you'll need to look up the details in the array and populate these fields with the owner details. And then let the users click the save button and you'll revalidate the data and replace that item in the array. Okay, so that's one possible design. That's the simplest possible design, probably. Or if you want to do it, if you want to be a little bit more fancy, then you could have the buttons over here and just a single panel showing at a time. So if the user clicks the create owner, the create owner panel would appear, and they could save or cancel and so on. Okay, and then if the user saves that and completes it, or cancels it and disables and abandons it, and they click edit vehicle, then the edit vehicle panel would appear here. Okay, so which panel appears depends on what what button the user clicked. Okay, so same sort of thing, but we're only showing one of those panels at a time. Again, that's a good design. I'll show you the code for this. This code's here, very, very easy. And I'll show you two options. So there's card layout and not card layout. And again, it all comes just down to set text, set enabled, set visible. And with card layout, you've got to set the card as well. Okay, makes sense? Any questions? We've got 9 people here now, so we've got a couple of extras. Any questions?
Good at this point.
Okay. Back to our. So let's look at some pseudo code then. And I'm going to be getting user input here, so please don't hide. I'll be when I say who wants to suggest the next thing to do here, I'm hoping for lots of enthusiasm and joining in. And so let's have a look at this now. So we're going to use the divide and conquer. We're going to just look at part of the problem. Divide and conquer means you look at part of the problem and try and understand that. And we're going to use pseudo code to try and map out what we need to do. Okay. So let's look at create owner. Let's go back to the spec. So create new owner record. Get the data entry about the new vehicle owner. Create an object from the data and store the object in the array list. Okay, so let's what's the first thing we need to do if the user click the create owner button then? Thinking about our prior storyboard as well, keeping that in mind. Anybody?
So you'd have to go to the relevant screen, panel, whatever.
Yep. So enable or show the relevant panel. That's it. Somebody else, that was Wayne, I think. So anybody else got the next steps or any of the steps? You can do them in any order. I'll just write them in here and we'll work out the order later. Anybody got any steps for creating an owner?
Input
Story
the-
the data. Input the data.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you speak up?
Input the data to the
Sorry,
array.
still can't.
Oh. Inputting the data into the array.
Could anyone catch that?
Inputting the data into the array.
Maybe try typing it in the chat window. You can type in the chat window if you don't want.
Inputting the data into the array.
Yeah, input the data into the array. Yep. Okay. Cool. That's definitely one of the steps. Any other steps? Thanks, Nicholas. Any other steps? So none from Wayne or Nicholas. They've done their share. We've got 7 other people that can do some input here. And anybody got any steps for creating an owner? What about
the license number and stuff as well?
Validation.
Yep. So you're gonna have to do some validation, and I'll copy Andrew's response there. So send user input to validation methods. Okay, we'll talk about that more a little bit later as well. That's coming up. So validate the data in some way, and if there's any errors, display an error. So check. So these are sort of steps we might want to do. Check input number 1. If error, display error message. Otherwise, and exit and stop processing. I'll just say stop for now. And we want to check input number 2. If there's any errors, display the error message and stop. Check input number 3 and so on. Yep, so that's the thing we want to do there. Anything else?
Display the entered data.
Sorry, say again.
Display the entered data.
Oh, good. Okay, sorry, that's much better. I've just realised my speaker was down on the other setting. Display the entered data. Display the entered data. You might want to do that if the user wants to, if you want to confirm that they want to add this user, this owner to the array or whatever. Yeah, you might want to display the entered data back. So get the data entry about the vehicle owner. Create an object from the data. Store the object in the array list. So I've got part of that there already. Into the array. Let's store in array list. Create an object. So we need to create an object from the data. Got most of the steps there. So we've just come back to our panel design that we talked about here. So maybe you want to set some GUI components to enabled. So you want to show and hide things. Maybe you want to set some components to enabled or disabled. Okay. So show the relevant panel, enable, disable GUI components as needed. You might want to set a heading text. So if they click the create button, it says create owner. If they click the edit button, it says edit owner. Okay, so a little bit of tidying up there for the GUI. And so then you want to so they send the inputting. Well, yeah. So then you want to validate the data, check the input number 1, number 2, number 3. Any errors, display the error, and then stop, don't do anything else. If everything's okay with the first bit of data, check the second bit of data. If that's okay, all good. If it's not okay, display an error and stop, don't do anything else. Otherwise, check input number 3 and so on until everything's valid. And you probably want to do that when they click the save button. So that would be okay. And if they click cancel, so we probably need a cancel button there. Cancel. We want to confirm cancellation. So it's confirmation dialog. If yes, if the user clicks yes, then do some tidying up as well. So maybe we want to hide that panel and then re-enable these buttons over here. So re-enable main buttons. Okay, so you can see there's quite a bit of stuff there when the user clicks the create owner button. Okay, and if everything's saved, then add to array list. Then create an object from the data. So if everything's okay, then that's when you create an object from the data and you add that object to the array list. Okay. Just like we did with managers and employees, just like you did in week 2 with vehicles, cars, trucks. It's almost exactly the same code. Bit of validation thrown in, maybe. So that's part of that as well. Data into the array. So that's how you do that. You create an object and then add the object to the array list. So that's basically it for create an owner. I don't know if we need to just, you might need to display the entered data if you like. You might pop up a confirm dialog saying, this is the data you entered, are you sure you want to add them? And then if they click yes, then add it. You might want to do that. So that might be something you do. Once all the data is validated, you might want to do that. That might be there if you want to. The spec doesn't say to do that, but you can do it if you want. Okay, so that's basically what create owner is. So we've taken something that we could barely understand and we've broken it down to make more sense of it. Okay, so you might be saying, well, I don't know what this does. What does that mean? Okay, so you might need to add more steps in there. So the thing is, you keep breaking things down further and further until you're ready to write the code. And so enable and show the relevant panel. Well, I might call this panel here the owner panel. So it might be owner panel set visible true. Okay. So it might be some code like that and so on. And for the button, for the save button over here, I want to make that enabled. Save button set enabled. True. So you might have a whole lot of code like that. Set that to enable, set that to enable, set that to enabled. And then you want to disable all these. So set that create owner button over here to disabled. So set enabled to false and so on. So you might have a whole lot of stuff there to juggle around when they click a button. Okay. Hopefully you'll find patterns in it so that when they click the create button and the edit button, it's similar code. Maybe you can make reuse of some code. So Andrew's made some good points here as well. We need to determine what sort of owner is inputted. So determine which sort of owner is inputted, because if it's a corporate owner, we need to enable the ABN, Australian Business Number field. Okay, and you might want to do that up here as well. So
Would it be best to do a combo box or like checkbox?
combo box or radio buttons, either one's fine. Yep, yep. Radio buttons or combo box. Box. Yep. So you have private or corporate, and so that from that you can determine what sort of owner is being inputted, and you can maybe set things to enabled or disabled. So if it's a private owner, if they click private, set the ABN data input to disabled, or maybe even hide it, and so on. Okay, so you might have some little bit of code here to run. You might actually add action listeners to your radio buttons or combo box, so that if they click a radio button, code automatically runs to hide or show things, and that'll also determine what sort of validation you do as well. If private, check their date of birth. Okay, so you'll have a little bit of different processing depending on that as well. Yep. So that's what I think Andrew said as well. Enable relevant input fields. So you could do that based on the radio buttons or checkboxes. Okay. And when they click the edit button, so you'll pop up a list of owners and say which owner do you want to edit, or you could let them maybe choose that from a combo box here. Not sure how you want to do it. You could prop up an input dialog saying enter the owner ID, and I could enter the ID, and then you could do a quick search and see if it's found, and if it's found, get the data out of the array list and populate the fields here. Okay, so if it's owner number 3 in the array list, then you'll say owner name. You'll get the owner name for that owner, and get their date of birth and get their corporate, private, and whatever, and set all the inputs up accordingly. But maybe only some of these might be enabled for edit. Maybe you can't change the name. Okay, so you need to work that out as well. So create owner, everything would be available, and you'd have different inputs based on private or corporate. But edit owner, maybe only some of these fields might be enabled. I'll leave that for you to work out. Okay, so we've now turned create owner into quite a script there. We've got quite a few steps. And the trick is you just keep breaking down the problem until you understand it enough. You go, I can write the code now. Okay. And then you're ready to go. So maybe you make this even more explicit. Check vehicle owner name. Okay, what does that mean? So again, go back to the spec and see what validation you need to do. Vehicle owner name. Name should contain only alphabetic characters. So how do you tell what's an alphabetic character in Java? What's the little method you can call? Only alphabetic characters, so no numbers. There's some little char functions. Okay, so you could get the input string from the user, get input from user as a string, because everything comes in as a string from a text field. You could loop through each character of input and check if any invalid. So check if anything's a digit or anything other than an alphabetic letter or a space, and so on. And so you can work out whether it's valid or not from that. So you might want to even just count invalid chars. And if invalid chars is greater than 0, then you've got an error. That's maybe the sort of processing you need for name. Okay, so we've broken down name a little bit as well. How to validate name. Okay, so just do that for each one. Keep breaking it down, divide and conquer. Just try and understand the next part of the problem. Don't try and understand the whole problem. It's too big. Just try and focus on a little part of the problem and understand that. Flesh it out, pull it apart, see what's going on. Okay. Any questions on create owner? Does everyone think they could probably be on the right track to do create owner now? Any questions? Okay. No, okay, thanks, Damien. Let's have a look at the next one. This might be really easy stuff for some people, but I think some people out there are probably going to struggle with some of this. So that's why I'm going over it. Let's look at the next little item on our sheet. I said we'd also do edit owner as well. So let's do edit owner. And maybe we won't talk about this in so much detail. Maybe we'll just talk about this a little bit more generally. Okay, so when a user clicks edit owner, so go back to our storyboard. Our storyboard's a good way to think about things. So they click the edit button. We want to pop up an input. The simplest way is to pop up an input dialog and ask them to enter the owner ID. Okay, and they type in an owner ID, maybe the number 10, and we'd loop through all the objects in the array, currently in the array. And well, the first thing to do would be to check if the array is empty. If there's no data in the array, there's no point propping up a dialog. So when they click the edit, if they check the array, if the array is empty, just say, sorry, array is empty, you can't edit anybody. Okay. If the array is not empty, then pop up a dialog saying, what's the owner ID? They type in an owner ID, you'll search through all the objects in the array, or in the array list. And if you find one with that owner ID, then you'll populate the fields, the input fields here with those details. So you get the name for that object, the date of birth if there's one, if the ABN if there's one, and so on. And then you'll set the fields to enabled or disabled, depending on whether input's allowed for those fields. Maybe they can't change owner name, I don't know. It's up to you to work out. And then they'll either click save or cancel. If they click save, you'll validate all the details again and replace that item in the array with the new details. If they click cancel, you pop up a confirmation dialog saying, are you sure you want to cancel? If they click yes, then you'll hide this panel and maybe re-enable these buttons over here again. Okay, so that's sort of the process for editing an owner. Is array or array list empty? And stop, otherwise prompt user to enter the owner ID. Input dialog, use an input dialog, that's fine. And search array for owner ID. If found, populate input fields, and so on. If not found, display error, stop, and then you could wait for user. You want to do the validation again and replace that item in the array. If user clicks cancel, then you do the same sort of thing we did for cancel up here. Confirm the cancel, and if yes, let them bail out. Okay, so you'll need to flesh those out as well. Okay, so they're the steps to go about completing the assignment. You need to, pseudo code's good. Writing pseudo code's good. You don't have to worry about the Java syntax. And you can really plan out what you need to do and make sure you understand stuff before you write code. Okay, because you don't want to start just writing random code and hoping it works. You want to plan things out. Any questions on edit owner or create owner? Any questions there?
Sir, about that array list.
Sorry,
About that array list.
array list.
So we have to, do we have to store the objects in the array list?
Yeah, array list. Yeah, you use an array list. The spec says use an array list. Yep. And if you're not
So
sure
what
about that,
was,
go on.
so the array list is the array list of objects.
That's right. That's right. So if we go back to what we did back in week 2, it was week 2, week 3, week 4. Oh, okay. So let's now change our employee tester to work with an array list. Here we just had objects. So you create it with this with the parent type of data. Here we had an employee superclass and a manager subclass. So you create them all to be the superclass type. Equals new. Oops. Employees. Call it employees array list. Equals new array list of employee. And so if we want to add an employee into our array list, there's one there. We could add emp1 that's already been created. So add the employee into the array list. And if we want to enter a new employee, we could say new employee. We could create it on the fly and add it. So on whatever the data is for the constructor. Okay, and we could add managers as well because it's all employee, an array list of employees can also store managers. So we could store boss in there. Okay, or we could create a new manager. Okay, so we did all this sort of stuff in the lectures. Okay, so you create it with your base, your superclass, your parent class, and then inside that array list you can add anything in the hierarchy. So you could add employees, managers. Over here with this, you'd create it of an array list of vehicles, and you'd have an array list of owners, wouldn't you? You'd have 2 separate array lists. And the vehicle array list could have light, heavy, and motorcycles. And the owner array list could have individuals or corporates. Just the same sort of stuff. You've got 2 array lists, and one contains owners, one contains vehicles.
Thank you.
So, Mike.
Yep.
I was wondering whether we should try and do like an aggregation class for each of the owners of vehicles, or whether we should just try and do it all in the one, the GUI like we did in last term, where we just create the array lists in the GUI and do it that way.
Yeah, it's a good idea to make a separate class for the array list. And that might be assignment 2. Okay. For now, just keep things simple. Keep the array list class and the methods that work on it in the GUI class. But yes, it would be a good thing to do, split it out into separate classes. So you'd have okay, so that would be a good design, but that might be assignment 2. If you want to have a go at it, I mean, we've done enough Java for you to do it, and it would neaten up your GUI code. So then you would have really clear distinction on what your classes do. The GUI just handles the GUI. This vehicle array list class just handles the array list to do with vehicles, and you might have an add method and a remove method or an edit method or whatever. You might have different methods in there. So you might be thinking about things like display all vehicles for an owner, save and load from file, exception handling, and even these sorts of things. Making your design a bit better, where you've got array lists. And that might be for assignment 2, because later on in term, we talk about generic classes. And you can actually combine these 2 into 1 class. So you get an array list class for vehicles and an array list class for owners, but you're sharing a lot of code between them. So generic classes and generic methods coming up. So much good stuff coming up. Okay, so back on our little sheet to keep us on track. So we've done all those things now. Okay, we've read the spec, we've highlighted keywords. I've showed you a couple of my very draft storyboards. So storyboarding is a great thing. 4 decades of writing code and I still storyboard. Okay, 4 decades of writing code and I'm still writing pseudo code. I still plan things out with pseudo code. So it makes things so much easier. So if you're finding things really hard, I don't know what to do next. What am I doing? Where am I going? What the hell does this all mean? Plan it out. Storyboards, pseudo code, divide and conquer. And you can't go wrong. Okay. So there's a question on a mailing list about, or on the forums about default constructors. And we've done those already. So I'll just show you a default constructor. This one. A constructor that doesn't take any parameters. There's one. Okay. There's also one in the manager class. There's a default constructor. That's all they are. Then you've got parameterized constructors. They're the ones that take 1 or more parameters. That's why they're called parameterized constructors. So each class can only have 1 default constructor, but you can have many parameterized constructors. So we've got 3, 1, 2, 3. And which one gets invoked depends on what data you pass. If you pass a string, a double, and 3 integers, this one gets called. If you pass a string, a double, 3 integers, and a bonus, or double, that one gets called, and so on. Okay, so Java works out which one to call based on what data you supply. And it's all about flexibility, providing flexibility for people who are using your classes. And we looked at these little shortcuts as well, where you can actually invoke a constructor from another one. And here we're invoking this parameterized constructor here is getting invoked because we're passing through a string and 5 numbers. So this one here gets invoked. This one is also invoking this one because we're passing through the 4 numbers that were provided to it, or 4 bits of data that were provided to it, plus the nut, plus the string, and we're just adding a 0 for bonus. So this is also invoking this one. And same for this one. They're also invoking this one up here. So one constructor is doing all the work. So by doing it that way, if there's any validation that's needed, you can do it in this one constructor and not repeat it here and here and here and wherever else. You just do it in one place. That makes your code a lot simpler, a lot easier. Okay, that's a little bit of a topic for later. Let's talk about copy constructors. Copy constructors. So I'll go back to week 2. And this is just our employee class we talked about in week 2. So we've got a default constructor. So copy constructors we haven't done yet. Okay. And we've got a parameterized constructor. So we can only have one of those per class. We can have many of these. We can have 0, 1, or many of those parameterized constructors. Okay. And we can also have a copy constructor. So we're creating a copy of an existing employee. So we want to pass through an employee. I'll call them emp. So we're passing through an employee and we want to make a copy of them. Okay, so we want to say name is equal to emp.getName. Okay. And their salary is equal to emp.getSalary. Okay, and their hire date is equal to emp.getHireDate. Now you want to make sure here you are creating a copy of the employee and a copy of all their data. You want to be very careful of doing this sort of stuff.
Because it's a reference type.
Exactly right. Here we're setting the hire day for the second employee equal to the hire day for the first employee, or this one that was passed in. So they're now both referring to the same object in memory. So if this employee's hire day changes, it will also change the original one. So we're corrupting our data here. We're creating links between our data, which we don't want. So that's why it's important to use the clone. Oh, return hire day date or local date. Clone. That's why you're going to be very careful with your accessor methods to return copies of the data. If you return just hire day, so make sure you use the clone method. And you might be asking there, well, strings are reference data. Why don't we have to do that with string? Well, string's got built-in protections already with it. When you say name equals whatever, it creates a new string all the time. Okay, and so strings are immutable. So this is safe because string is an immutable class. And I think we talked about that in the prior lecture. If not, we'll talk about it later in the term as well. Immutable means it can't be changed. So if you do try and change name, a new object is created automatically by Java. Okay, but local dates and everything else isn't immutable. So so get hire date's safe because it returns a copy of the data. Down here, it returns a copy of the data. We're returning a clone of the data, clone, and then typecasting it to local date. Just keep Java happy. Okay, and up here, that would be a warning because it's the same warning. So do not do that. Do that. So you've got to really watch your references from now on. It's so easy to do to just say return hire day and you think you're safe, but that's return a reference to the data. So if whatever's got that reference decides to change the data, you can end up in all sorts of strife. And again, it might not be a big problem for a date, changing a date. Well, okay, so maybe they started in the company a year later. It might not be a huge thing, but imagine you're returning a reference to their address or their bank account. Okay, and all of a sudden, all these employees' pay start going into the one bank account. Imagine what a disaster that would be. Okay, so make sure you return a complete copy with your getter methods. And that's why it's a good idea when you're using any class data inside your class, try and use the accessor methods because they'll take care of anything that needs to be done for safety. You say return emp.get hire day or whatever. Okay, so there's three data items here, and we've created a copy of all three. Okay, so now we can invoke that method. Let's go back to our tester, and we can say employee 2 equals new employee 1. We can now create objects based on other objects. About to print line print M2, and that should work fine. Day.clone. Okay, so I need to do a little bit of work here with high days, unfortunately. So when you use high day, there's something extra I need to do. We haven't done enough Java yet. Okay, haven't quite done enough Java to make that work yet. Damn it. Okay, for now we'll just do the dangerous stuff. Just make our code compile. But this is bad. Okay. And there's our second employee, so it's a direct copy. Okay, but they are referring to the same object in memory for the date, which is bad, bad, bad. Okay, so we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that more as we talk in the future. Okay, so
The assignment says not to use local dates for dates anyway.
yeah, okay, yeah. So if we use date there, that would be quite okay. Local date's a little bit different. Let's give it a try. Set. We don't have a set for local date in there. Let's do a set method for local date, and we'll pass them a year, month, and day. Set higher day. Should be high date, but anyway, call it high day. We just want to run that code there. High day equals local date of. Okay, so we can change the high date anytime now. That's now a mutator method. It's changing our class data. Let's do an emp1. Set high day to so we changed to employee 1's high day. Let's see if emp2 has changed. Oh, set void. It's got to be void. And you'll see here, the higher day for employee 1 has changed, which is what we did. We said set higher day for employee 1. That's changed to the new date. But employee 2, that hasn't changed. Okay, so local date is actually good. You don't have to worry about creating a copy for local date. It's already built into the class that it's protected. Okay, so just returning high day. Normally it's an issue, but okay for local dates. Normally, for everything else, dates, employees, bank accounts, products, customers, you've got to create a copy. Okay, so we checked it's okay for local dates. Confirmed. It's not a bad idea to write yourself a little note like that as well when you do it. When you find it works for one of them, just write yourself a little note to confirm it does work. That's okay. Local date. Okay, so that's all cool. That's working. So that's the copy constructor. We're creating a copy of an existing object, and they're usually quite easy. It's just local field or class field dot get whatever, class instance field dot get whatever, class instance field dot get whatever. But you get it for this object, emp dot emp dot emp dot. Pretty easy. Any questions? Okay, so we hadn't seen those before. That's something new. Copy constructors. System assigned. Okay, so simple date format. Yes, so when you're validating dates, I'll add that onto the list. Kurt, that's a good question. Can we use simple date format? Yes, I'll add that onto the list. I'll come back to this one a little bit later at the end. Okay, so I'll come back to this question. I won't forget. I might put it down the end as well, just so I don't forget. That's right down the end. Righto, so let's now move on to system assigned IDs. So we did that back in week 1 as well, when you've got a system allocating your IDs for you. Week 1. And we did that when we talked about static. So with this static field here, the next ID. Okay, so that field is shared amongst all class objects. They all have the same value of next ID. And if one of them increments it, they all increment it. It's like communal data for all employees. So down here in one of these constructors, if I said next ID plus plus down in here, and then said ID equals next ID, we'd increment one to that communal field and then set our ID equal to that value. That's the next one. Okay, so we can do this sort of thing inside our constructor. And it all comes down to the static. If you want to start the numbering at 100, you could just say next ID equals 100. And then down in your constructor, and your constructor here, you could just say, add 1 to it. Set the ID for that employee. IDs are good to the next ID. Anybody remember the shortcut to combine those 2 lines of code into one? If you want to get really, really compact, if you want to combine those into 1 line of code, you can do it with 1 line of code. What would the command be? 2 lines of code's fine, but if you want to do it in 1 and you want to increment before you allocate, you go plus plus. Okay. If you want to use the current value and allocate after, put the plus plus there. Okay. Depends on whether you want to increment the ID and then allocate it, or allocate the ID that currently exists and then increment it. So pre and post increments, like we talked about in the prior course. That would be incorrect here because we're incrementing the ID and then allocating it. So we're incrementing the ID and then allocating the new value. You can do it with 1 line of code if you want to. And so that's shared amongst all class objects. Every employee you create has got their own, have got that communal data up shared amongst all objects where next ID lives. So if one of them adds, if you create an employee and we're adding 1 to next ID, that's affected that global data for all employees. That's that because we've got static in front. Okay. If we left off the static, then every employee would have an ID of 100 or 101, depending on whether we did post increment or pre-increment. Okay, but the static is what makes it special. Static. That's your IDs. Any questions there?
I was wondering whether we need to have a plate number that's like what a real plate number is, or just have like 100.
Okay. Okay. We'll come on to that one at the end too, Wayne. That's a good question, though. That's a good question. We'll come on to that one a little bit later. I'm just saving some general questions for later, just to make sure we cover the bits I've got covered, bits I've got set out here for a while. So let's just go back to our notes. So we've mapped out that. We've talked about the default constructor, copy constructor, system assigned IDs. Let's talk about validating inputs. Validating inputs. Okay. And so here's some code on validating inputs. Now, if we'd, this is probably the same as what you did for Summit 2 in the prior course. If not, you definitely would have done this sort of code for various tutorial questions if you did them. Okay, so it's nothing new here. Now, I've got some notes here and I've repeated it 3 times because this is really important. If we covered exception handling, which we cover next week or after the break, we would not do it like this. Okay, we would do it much better, much cleaner. Okay, so this is all in your GUI class. And this is all pseudo code. Again, I've made that very clear. People still ask me, is that pseudo code? But it's all pseudo code I'm showing you. So this is the sort of code that you would run when you use click the add button or the save button or whatever it is. Okay, so you would check if input number 1 is blank or invalid. And if it is, then you would place the cursor inside that component's text field, or you make that text field selected somehow. And you might also highlight it so it's red or something, so you can really make it clear. If there's lots of inputs on the screen, you might make it highlighted red. And then you would display a meaningful error message to the user in a swing dialog. And then you would stop any other processing. Don't do anything else. Okay, so if you find an error, stop. Take action for it, display an error, and then stop. So if everything's okay, then we're on to input number 2. Check if that's blank or invalid. And if it is, then you put the cursor in that input field or highlight it red or whatever you can do to help the user. Display a meaningful error message and then stop further processing. Then do the same for input 3 and so on for all inputs. You just follow that process through, do it for all inputs. And then eventually you get to a stage where you've validated everything. If you get down here, everything's valid. You haven't aborted. Okay. So abort in Java could be a return method, a return statement, just to return out of the method. Okay. If you get down here, everything's fine. So you could do whatever processing is required. You could create an object. You could add them to an array or an array list, whatever you need to do. You could increment counters. You could reset inputs. Whatever you need to do when the save is successful. You could display confirmation dialog. You could save the data to file. Whatever you need to do when the save is valid, when all the data is valid, that's what you do down here. And now that's not part of the assignment. So I'm just saying that these are things you could do. Save to file, save to database, whatever you need to do. Okay. So that's sort of how we did things back in the prior course. And that's how you'll have to do them in this course too for now. Okay. But next week we're covering exception handling, which opens up a whole new world of stuff we can do to streamline our code. Let's just talk about that briefly. So what belongs where? It's a game I like to play. What belongs where? It's like pin the tail on a donkey. So where should particular functionality or methods go? So if we had an inheritance hierarchy like this with employee and manager as a subclass, and we might have a setup like this where we've got a GUI class, an employee class, a manager class. And the idea with object-oriented programming or object-oriented design, OOP or OOD, is that every class is self-contained. All of the data and the methods that work on that data are contained in a single unit called a class. That's the whole point of it, have everything all self-contained. So where should the employee data be stored? Should it be stored in the GUI class, the employee class, or the manager class?
Employee.
Yeah, employee, that's right. It's not a trick question. Okay, we might store it temporarily in the GUI class while we're doing some adding and some checking and some processing. Okay, but the idea is that the employee class stores the original master copy of the data. Okay, so if we need any data, if we ever need to get the employee data, we get it out of the employee class. What about the manager? Where should manager data be stored? Same answer, really. It's not a trick question. Okay, manager also includes employee, but it's stored in those objects, isn't it? It's stored in those classes in that hierarchy. Okay, you don't store the manager data in the GUI class. You might do it temporarily while you're working on stuff to process stuff, to do some searching or some sorting or some checking user inputs. You might store the data here temporarily. The idea is the manager class or its superclasses contain the data. So where should employee data be checked or validated? If the employee class owns the data and is responsible for the data, where should it be checked or validated?
Well, it follows logically that it would be the employee class.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. Where should the error message be created if any employee? So if there's if the owner field's wrong, if it's blank, if it contains digits or something like that, where should the error message be generated? Not displayed, but where should the error message be generated? What class knows what the error is?
Employee.
Exactly. And where should the error message be displayed? So what class should be responsible for displaying error messages to the user? What class is responsible for interacting with the user?
The GUI.
Displaying it in the
GUI.
specific field.
It's a GUI class. Okay, so the employee class should check the data. The employee class should generate error messages, and just tell the GUI class, "I've had an error. You handle the display of this error however you handle it." Okay, and it might be a dialog, it might be in a label, it might be a web app, it might be a console app, it might be displaying it in a console app, it might not be a GUI at all. It could be a console app, it could be a web app. Could be all sorts of interesting apps. So we could be displaying it in labels. We could be displaying it in special HTML. We don't know. The point is that these classes don't know where they're running. They could be in any type of application, and they shouldn't need to know. Okay, the user interface class, whatever it might be, the UI class knows where it's running. So it should be responsible for all user interactions. These shouldn't know anything about the user interface. Okay. Where should the manager data be checked? And again, it's the manager and employee classes. They sort of do it together. The employee checks the employee part, the manager checks the manager part. Okay. Where should the error message be created if the manager data is invalid? Well, it's in one of those classes. And again, which class should display the actual error? And it's the user interface class. Okay, so after we do exception handling, we can build this sort of design. So all of our validation would go inside the data classes. We'd have none inside our GUI. So our GUI code would shrink down like this, and down to 20 lines of code gone into the data class where it belongs. But for now, for assignment 2, for now, we haven't done enough Java quite yet. We haven't done exception handling. Okay, so we'll do this way for now for assignment 2, which is what we did in assignment 2 back in the prior course. But just keep in mind that this is not the way you would do it. If we've done exception handling, we do it a different way, a much cleaner way, much neater way, where we really are splitting out the responsibility and obeying the responsibility of each class. Employees are responsible for employee data, and that includes validation. Same for manager. Okay, and all the UI should do is just interact with the user, get user input, pass it through the data classes to do the work, and then get the results back and display the results. Okay, so
can we use try and catch anyway, or are we gonna?
If I think I'll ask Farzad that one on the forums. I'll make a little note down the end here. Unless you want to do it, can students use? And, that's all exception handling is really. It's try, catch, and there's some other commands as well. Finally, and throw, and bits and pieces like that. But they're the main 2 commands here. So basically anything that might cause an exception goes in a special block of code called a try block. And when you want to handle the exception, you put that in a catch block. Okay, but we haven't done, these are what we cover next week. It's not particularly hard. But we haven't officially covered them yet, but I'll ask that in the course forums unless someone else wants to ask it.
When you say next week, you mean, is that the week after?
Sorry, yeah, next week of term, yes. Yeah, not the midterm break. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we've done the validation inputs. We've talked about my storyboards. Okay, so now we're up to, we've done the what belongs where, we've done that. We played what belongs where, one of my favorite games. We might do a little bit of borders and frames next. Borders and frames. So if you look at some of my, I'll just show you a quick app here. So you'll see I've got all these options here contained in a nice little border. So all the sort options are together. And then there's a sort type all together in the same sort of grouped area and the sort order. Okay. And it's sort of a nice way to group controls, make it really obvious to the user which ones belong together. Okay, and you can put different types of border on it, and you can put a label here as well automatically, so you don't have to worry about putting an extra label. It's all built into the frame or the border. Okay, and the code to do that's really quite easy, and I'll show you that now. And basically you do an import for javax.swing.border.star to bring in all the border stuff. And then if you want to put a border on a panel, you can just say myPanel.setBorder, new titled border, and then inside round brackets, new etched border, and a title that you want to give it. and then close round bracket for that first U, and then close round bracket for the second round bracket. Okay, so it's that easy to put a border around things. And I generally put a space before and after my text because it just looks a little bit neater. The border's got a bit of a gap between your label and where the border starts. It puts a little bit of a gap in there. I think that looks a bit neater. When the border runs right up to your text, it looks a little bit messy for me. It looks a bit, yeah, not as nice. Whatever works for you, doesn't matter. Okay, so that's one way you can put a border around things and separate out your components. So you might have, for Summit 2, you might have owner type, and you might have private and corporate. There's radio buttons in there. Okay, so that's how you do borders. It's really easy in Java. Any questions on that? Okay. So a strategy for dealing with multiple screens. So I might show you two examples here, and these are both on my GitHub. Okay, so I've got 3 buttons here that determine which screen's going to get displayed: show panel 1, show panel 2, show panel 3. And I've got some panels from adding stuff, and I've got panel 1's components. So you've got to label a button and a text field for now. Just 3 components. My label 1, my button 1, my text field 1. Not very imaginative, but just an example. And then panel 2's got my label 2, button 2, text field 2, and then panel 3 components down here. Okay, so I've got 3 panels, panel 1, 2, and 3. And I've got the components for each panel here that I haven't added yet. They get added down below. Okay, and then which one gets shown is going to depend on which button I click. So this is just to help you with a Summit 1. If you didn't want to do this design for Summit 1, where everything's all on one screen, if that really annoyed you, and you want to try and make it a little bit neater where it's just one panel at a time, you want to do something like this, then this is for you. Okay. If you're happy with this design where everything's all on one frame, which is fine for Summit 1, if you want that design, then you don't have to worry about what I'm going to show you now. Okay. Here's our constructor. And I'm just to separate out the code a little bit, make the code a little bit neater. I've got methods to create the panels. So create panel 1, create panel 2, create panel 3. I've got a button panel, which has got a flow layout where I'm adding the buttons to control which panel gets displayed. I'm adding the main center panel, which is this one up here. The main center panel is going to contain one of those panels. That's added to the center region, the border, and the button panel is added to the south. And I've activated buttons 1, 2, and 3 by show panel 1, show panel 2, show panel 3. Okay, so otherwise I could do this sort of stuff as well. I could actually pass the panel 3 that's going to get displayed. A whole lot of ways to do this stuff. I just get it as simple as I could. Create panel 1 just adds the label, text field, and button to panel 1 and sets its layout to flow layout. The panel already exists. Here it is here. It already exists, so we're just adding components to it. That's all create panel 1 does. Create panel 2 does that. Just adds components to it, sets its layout. I've got a flow layout for panel 1, a grid layout for panel 2, and another type of grid layout for panel 3. So this is 3 rows, 1 column. This is 1 row, 3 columns. Just have something different, just to show they are different things. So you can see I'm not just showing the same panel each time. Just make it a little bit different, just for fun. Okay, and down here, show panel 1. I'm doing a remove all from the center panel. I'm adding a panel 1 to the center of main panel, of the main center panel. I'm calling revalidate and repaint. Okay, so you remove all, then you add the panel, then you revalidate and repaint. And that just gets the refresh panel to show. If you don't call these methods here, sometimes your panel will show, sometimes it will half show, sometimes you'll get funny glitches going on. So revalidate, repaint, make sure you're not getting the graphical glitches that can sometimes happen. Show panel 2, remove all, add the panel 2, revalidate, repaint. And show panel 3, remove all, add panel 3, revalidate, repaint. So that's all the show panel buttons do. Just remove everything that exists in center panel already and add the new panel. Remove everything that exists there already, add the panel you want, and so on. Simple little main, just like we've seen many times already. So when I run this code here, If I click panel 1's showing, panel 2 is panel 2, panel 3. That's with the 3 columns, that's with the 3 rows, that's with the flow layout. So you could use that sort of technique if you wanted for a somewhat one, if you want to. If this really is like fingernails on a chalkboard for you and you want to try and do something a little bit neater where only one input frame or one data entry frame shown at a time, then what I've just shown you there is one way to do it. An even simpler way would be to use a thing called card layout. So card layout's a brilliant thing. Card layout's like a tabbed. This is like a tab dialog. We get the tabs along the top. See the tabs in TextPad? That's like a tabbed pane in Java. But what if you don't want the tabs? Well, then there's a thing called a card layout. Okay. So we've created a new panel called card layout panel, given it a card layout. And they've got a card layout object, which is a reference to the card layouts panel. So card layout panel get layout, card layout. So we're getting a reference to the card layout, which is inside this panel, which is card layout panel. So card layout's what we're going to use to change which panel's available, which panel's getting shown. Okay, so we don't need main panel anymore, so that's commented out. Nothing else has changed. Down here, I've made it so we're adding the 3 panels to the card layout panel. Add panel 1 and call it panel 1. Give it a label of panel 1 internally. Panel 2, call it panel 2 internally. This isn't a label that appears on the user interface. It's just an internal label for us. And panel 3, okay. So nothing else has changed here. That's all I did was add that in. And I've commented out the main panel to the center because we're now adding card layout panel to the center. Okay, so main panel's not getting used anymore. None of this has changed. The create panels hasn't changed, but we've simplified our code down here in our show panel. Card layout show, card layout panel, panel 1. So this is that internal name that we gave it up here, or we gave it a name. Okay, so whatever that name there is, that's what you use down here to show the panel. So card layout.show, the panel that you're going to show, and the entry on the panel, or the tab on the panel, if you like, without the label. Same for panel 2, same for panel 3. So it shows you doing a remove and a revalidate and a paint and so on. And nothing's changed here. So card layouts are really easy to work with. You basically just create a bunch of panels, add them to the card layout panel, and you give them a special label that you're going to use internally in your code. And then here you just go card layout.show, and then whatever that reference is. So it could be main user interface, it could be main screen, data entry screen 1, data entry screen 2, customer selection screen. You could just keep showing different cards as many as you like. So they're really easy to work with. So let's look at that one. Not really surprising that it's not going to be much different. Okay, it's just showing the panels that we've already got. But you can see it's a little bit less code. Okay, and you could actually combine these 3 methods into one. Let's do that. Show panel or show card panel. I just call it show panel. String. Okay, so I'm going to comment out these methods now. All 3 of those get commented out. I'm actually replacing it by one show panel method, and we'll just pass through the label of it. Okay, so comment all those show panel 1, 2, 3 outs, and up here it just becomes. I'll leave the old code there so you can see it still. New code's even simpler. Show panel. Okay, so we're telling Java which panel to show in the call to the show panel method, and that'll still be fine. So that's reduced our code even further. It still works the same. Okay. So pretty easy stuff. What if you wanted, when the user interface first appears, what if you wanted panel 3 to be displayed by default? Okay, so up here in your constructor, just before you finish, just call show panel 3, and that will be the default screen showing. I might not have recompiled it. Did I recompile it? Ah, okay, so. Okay, so again, we might need to do that. We might need to do a revalidate repaint on the user interface to make that show up. Okay, so revalidate the user interface, repaint the user interface, see if that works. Still not. Okay, that's interesting. I'll have a look at that and get back to you with a fix in the future if anyone's worried about that. Otherwise, just that's really all you need to do, have the buttons to show the different panels. Okay. And so I've got a question there from Kurt. Are we able to use NetBeans GUI Builder? Okay, so first thing is we haven't covered it in class. Second thing, it's actually a bunch of things. First thing is that haven't covered it in class. 2, built so far from first principles. So we used to do, we're used to doing it, or we should be used to doing it if you follow like the way we do it in class. That we've built everything from first principles, writing the code, add a label to a panel, add a panel to the user interface, and so on. And 3 is NetBeans. NetBeans generates horrible code. In the past, we have tried to use NetBeans from the introductory course, and all term it became all of the emails from students became, I can't get NetBeans to do this, I can't get NetBeans to do that. What the hell is NetBeans doing here? So NetBeans it looks like it's easy, just dragging and dropping components, but it's actually creating also a nightmare of code that unless you've done it from first principles and know what you're doing really well, you won't have a hope of understanding what NetBeans is doing. And let's see what the spec says. Okay, again, I'm going to clarify this one with Farzad on the forums. My answer there would be no, because you've got to really learn to do things in first principles. Otherwise, you won't understand the code NetBeans generates, and you'll have a horrible time. But I will check with Farzad. He's a course coordinator on the forums. So after class, I'll ask Farzad a few questions. Anything for me to follow up with? Check with Farzad. Okay, so we're going very well so far. We've covered just about everything I thought we needed to cover. That's a strategy for dealing with multiple display screens if this layout really annoys you. Okay, and don't forget for Summer 2, you will need to worry about having separate display screens, because there's going to be a whole lot more. There's going to be display all owners and display all vehicles and display all vehicles for an owner and all that sort of stuff. So you will have to worry about having This won't work for Summit 2. It might be okay for Summit 1. It might be okay if you can fit enough in. Okay, but anyway, I've shown you those two examples, and all the codes there on the GitHub, on my GitHub. So, and I'll make sure I check in this latest version with the. Whoop, that's that one still. I'll make sure I check in this latest version with the communal repaint. Okay, so we left out those. We've talked about the create owner, just edit owner, array lists. They're all probably part of a Summit 2. If you want some more help with solving problems and getting started, and how do you solve and start and complete and work through big programs, big projects, there's some videos on my Mike's Java videos there, and there's one of them and there's another. So part 1 and part 2 are there, where I spent about 40 minutes or more going through how to do storyboards, divide and conquer, highlight keywords, all that sort of stuff. Just go through it again. Okay, so let's go on to some, can we use just the counter? And you can, for Summit 1, you can use just the counter. Let's just have a look at the spec. So the plate number is unique identifier order allocated by the system. And down here it says the plate number there, and plate number was validation rules. Plate number should be alphanumeric. So it can contain letters and numbers as well. So if you want to allocate a one without alphanumerics. Okay, so there our ID is integer, but if we change it to a string, and comment out the old one, then we could make it a string down here if you wanted, by saying you put ABC at the front of all your number plates if you wanted to. Okay, in fact that should even be a constant. Private static string. Should even be a constant. It's probably not going to change. Number plate prefix. So that would let you do an alphanumeric one. If you want to also change that and allocate random digits, you can as well if you want. One of the students actually sent me some Summit code to review, and he'd done a wonderful thing where he'd allocated a unique 3 digits and then 3 letters or something like that. So, and kept looping until it was unique. So not just an add one, but he did a whole method where he was looping through, pulling out random integers, pulling out random digits, and keep looping until he can get a unique license plate. So really the sky's the limit. But the basic thing is you just had a number that you increment. That's the basic. So that would be perfectly okay. Okay, for someone. Okay, so random 3 letters and 3-digit numbers, and loop until you get a unique value. You can, I guess, if you want as well, you can. But that's overkill. And again, I'd suggest that's overkill as well for a Summit 1. Just stick with it, whatever. Okay, so I'll check with Farzad on the forums if we can use exception handling, even though we haven't officially covered it until a week after term, a week in the next next half a term, week 6. I'll also check on Farzad whether you can use the NetBeans GUI builder. I think his answer is probably going to be no, because we've done everything from first principles in class. Everything you built so far should have been from first principles, and NetBeans generates such horrible, horrible code. We've got time for a quick date validation. Just wondering about the best way to show you. Okay. Right. So I'll show you this little bit of code. Don't panic. Okay. Please don't panic. So here's a little bit of code you can use to validate dates. So I've done some imports there for date, simple date format, and pass exceptions. So, and again, you can use the asterisk versions if you want. That's fine. I've set up a date. Date today equals new date. I've created a simple date formatter where I want my format of dates to come in like, and I've called it that formatter. That's my name. And it's accepting dates or processing dates in year, month, day order with minus signs between them or hyphens between them. I've got a pass date there of null. Date pass date equals null. And I'm assuming there's a bit of text there with a date in it. Might have come from a text field or from user input or from a file or somewhere. And I'm trying to convert this text into a date. Okay. And I'm using my simple date format object, which is that chap there. Year, month, day formatter dot pass. So I'm passing the date that's coming in as a string, and I'm trying to convert that using that same format into a valid date, which is going to be stored inside pass date. Okay. So once we know about exception handling, instead of checking that the year's valid, the month's valid, the day of the month's valid, and we're not in a leap year and February's got 28 days unless it's a leap year and all that sort of stuff, you can just do this. So much easier to check dates. Okay, and then you've got a try catch there. Okay. So that's basically the code for if you want to try and use simple date format to check your dates. That's a way to do it where you can, and the user could pass in anything here. They could pass in Fred if they wanted to, and that would cause this code down here to run because we've got a pass exception. That's not going to pass. That's not going to pass as a valid date. So we've got a pass exception being raised, and we can generate an error message there. Okay, so again, that's going into week 6's material here. But like I think a lot of people have twigged already that have looked ahead at exception handling, it does actually simplify your code. Because you have to go through and check if every part of the input's a digit and check it's in the right range. You can just say, try and convert it, and if it fails, I know it didn't work. And if we're doing integers and we're getting integers from user, int num equals integer.parseInt 123. We could convert the string 123 into an integer called num with integer.parseInt. So we're doing all these pass methods in week 6 as well, where we convert data from one to another, from strings to whatever usually. And here we're converting a string to an integer with integer.parseInt. You're going to do a double L equals double.parse double 23.456, and that will convert that into a double. And if that fails, it'll run this code down here, whatever that might be. Whatever's in the catch block runs if it fails. Okay, I feel like you should show a lot of the GUI stuff here we're doing here, and some exception handling in other course. Yeah, I think you're right, Jared. Yeah, I think I agree with that. Well, assignment 2 really in the second half of last term there's a lot of GUI programming in there, and I was saying to students, once you've answered the question for extra practice, create a GUI version of it. So hopefully you've got a lot of GUI practice already. You can do the assignment 1 quite well without exception handling, although what I've shown you here would help simplify the exception handling, because you can just try and convert it, and if it fails, it fails. You have to worry about checking that this is a 2-digit number between 0 and whatever. Yeah, that's true. Yes. So another point here. We got given we just got given a template for the GUI in assignment 2 for last term. Yeah, I know you did. Yeah. I guess our final assignment was changed. I'm not sure what you mean, Jared, by so final was something changed. That's true. And that's yes, agree. But like I say, you don't need exception handling for this assignment. You can do it without it. Okay, so last term we had to build it all from scratch for the final assignment because it was changed. Okay, are you talking about in the prior course, Jared? Yeah. Okay. Well, I was a Rocky tutor last term for the prior course, and nobody had to rebuild the GUI. It was provided. We did it in the tutes where I showed you enough GUI programming so you could build the assignment yourself. And some people actually went on and did that. But the code provided was fine. You could use the code that was provided. You didn't have to rebuild it if you didn't want to, but it was good practice too. And I had about 15 Rocky students, and probably about 3 or 4 wrote it all themselves again. So, and I could tell because the code was different from Bruce's. And they'd use lambdas to link up buttons and things, which is one thing that Bruce's code didn't do. So you didn't have to rebuild anything last time. You could have used the one that was given. That was fine.
Not talking about the final assessment that was instead of the exam.
Oh, the final assignment. The final assessment. Right, I got you. Yes, last time there was an assignment 3 instead of exam. I got you now. I got you. Yes. So you had to build all that from scratch. Yes, that's right.
But it didn't actually require you to have a GUI.
Oh, didn't it?
No.
I never got to see the question, so I couldn't comment. But, yes, I think someone might have shown me, or I got a glimpse of it. I think there was various options where if you wanted to pass, it could be a console app. Is that what I'm thinking? Am I thinking the wrong thing? If you wanted a better mark, like a credit or a high distinction or whatever, it had to be a GUI. I think there was different levels. If I'm thinking,
that's about right. Yeah.
Okay, that's right. I wasn't sure whether I was thinking about the wrong thing there, but if you wanted a credit or better.
In the specification, it just said you didn't have to, you could just do a console app, but if you wanted better marks, do a GUI. It wasn't specific.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes to go. Not much time this class. We have got the workshops coming up. I think they're next Monday, but check the course forums. I think they are coming up on Monday, but check the forums. I'm going to be running one of them. And if students want to do a lot of GUI stuff and that, we'll do a GUI stuff. We'll build a GUI from scratch. Okay, so we'll have labels, buttons, panels from scratch. And if you want to follow along, you can follow along. As well as that, if you can't make the workshop, well, in my Java videos, where I'll work through tutorial questions, and a question says create a GUI to do this, and I actually develop it all live in the video. So there's tons of those examples there in my Java videos. So if you're not sure about creating GUIs, examples are many examples there in my Java videos, so you can get all the help you need. Okay. But otherwise, we'll try and do some in the GUI, some GUI programming in the workshop coming up. But that's all being set up by Farzad, so to be confirmed by Farzad, course coordinator, and keep an eye on the forums. I mean, GUI programming is really quite easy. The scary stuff is when you're trying to do it in NetBeans, because then you're trying to work out what NetBeans has done and how on earth you can write code to interface with what NetBeans has done. That's the scary stuff. And this, you'll see some of the code NetBeans generates looks like this. It'll be method param1. And it'll write so much code for one Java statement. It likes to put it on the next line and the next line and the next line. So it'll be 3, 4, 5, and it'll be just got dot calling methods. And eventually somewhere down here, there'll be a semicolon. And that's all one Java statement. And NetBeans generates mountains of code like that. If you're using a GUI builder, you're going to be seeing it. And it's horrible stuff. If it put it away in its own separate file, so you wouldn't have to look at horrible code like that, might be a little bit better, but it puts it in amongst your nice code. And if you take pride in your code, and NetBeans is doing stuff like this to it, it just ruins your code. And it's complex as well, much more complex than it needs to be. Okay, so there's those resources there. We've got the workshop coming up. And any final questions before we head off? Me. Okay, if everyone's okay, we might end there. Unless you want to build a quick GUI in 10 minutes, we can easily do it. Anybody want to build a GUI in 10 minutes? If anyone says yes in the chat window, I'll do it. I'll try to. So Jared's just made a comment there. I've tried to run a GUI in NetBeans before and I couldn't actually get it to show up. Yeah, look, NetBeans is a huge, complex tool. It's got a million menu options and things to click, and the code it generates full. So you got the two things there counting against NetBeans really. We can do a quick GUI in 10 minutes. Let's have a quick go. So it might only be a little one, but we can still do it. Week 5, I'll call it sample GUI. Sample GUI.java. Just have it so public class sample GUI. We'll put our main in public static void main string. If you're following along, you might need to. I might be a little bit too fast for you, but you'll have the video, so you better follow along the video a little bit better. GUI app show or set visible true. You've got to make it visible, otherwise it won't show up. App.set default close operation to jframe.exit close, otherwise it won't close, it'll just go hidden. App.set size to 600 pixels wide by 400 high. And there's other things you do as well, but they're the main things. App. And we're going to extend JFrame because we're building a GUI, extends JFrame. I'm going to do some imports. Public import java.awt.star 10:50. I've still got 10 minutes. awt.event.star for the button handling. And we want to bring in swing, which is javax.swing.star. So we're bringing AWT for various things that we might need. Not necessarily in this example. We're bringing the event stuff to handle buttons and swing stuff to handle labels and panels and so on. JLabel, my label, JLabel, hello world, JButton, button equals JButton, change label, and I'll have a text field, J text field for user input, my text field, J text field, and I'll make it 10 characters wide, 10 characters visible at once, but it can hold up to 2 gigabytes of data or so, maybe even more. I've never really pushed it, but I have a lot of text there, but it's going to create a window of approximately 10 characters wide. Okay, now a constructor, probably followed by the class name, followed by round brackets. I'm going to add the label, add the button, add the text field. So what do you think might happen here? What will we see on screen? We're adding a label and a button and a text field. What will we see on screen?
Would it just be the text field?
Yeah, exactly right. Well done. Okay, it's just one massive text field. We can type there. It's one massive thing really high. If we hit enter, we can't go to the next line. It's only a single line of text. So it's one big fat text field. That's all we get. And that's because the default layout is border layout. And when you add something to a border layout, it gets added to the center region if you don't specify a region. So all of those components are going to the center region of a border layout, which is the default for JFrame. And so when we add my button, label gets kicked out. When we add my text field, buttons get kicked out. So it's only the last component that stays. So what you can do is you can create, you can set the layout, set layout to new flow layout, which is like words on a page. And you just keep adding stuff to the flow layout. And if they can't fit on the current line, they wrap down onto the next line. Okay, so we just changed our user interface layout to flow layout. Okay. By default, JFrames have got a border layout, which means everything, unless you specify a region, it gets added to the center. So they're all added to the center. But now they're being added to the flow layout, so they should all appear. Control 1, Control 2. And there they all are. Okay, so our label and our change label button in our text field. Now let's wire up the button. So my button dot add action listener. Adding a listener to the button, and the listener we're adding is an action listener, which means it deals with mouse clicks on the button. And we're going to use lambdas here to make our code a little bit shorter, or a lot shorter, a lot simpler. So we're going to assign an event to the button, and when that button gets clicked, it's going to run the code called change label. We're going to run our own method called change label whenever that button's clicked. Private void change label. And what we want to do is we want to get the text out of the text field, and we do that with get text. So my text field dot get text. That gets whatever the user typed in out of the text field out of the text field, and we want to set the labels text to that text. So string input string. Go to my text field dot get text. So getting the text out of the text field, whatever the user typed, and we're going to set the text to the label. So my label dot set text to whatever the input string was. Okay, so we're getting whatever the user typed in the text field, and we're putting it in a label with set text. Control 1, Control 2, and let's type some text in there, Fred, and we'll click change label, and that. Sorry, I changed the button text, not the label text. Should be my label.setText. I changed the button text to Fred. My label it should be. Okay, and Fred, and click change, and see the label's changed to Fred now. If I change it again, change label. So there's a basic GUI. They're really not hard to do. It's a handful of lines of code. You'll have some components at the top. I'm just finishing off a class. I'll call you back, okay? Thank you. Yep. And set the layout, add the components to the user interface, activate any buttons you need or menu options or whatever you need. And then you'll have methods to deal with each button click. There's a button there that's calling the change label and a simple main like that. And that's really all they are. Okay, so you just build them up in little bits of pieces. And if you need multiple panels, you could add all these components here to a panel and add the panel to another panel and add it to another panel and add it to the user interface. So you can build things up like a jigsaw and put them all together and then put them onto the user interface. The trick is to plan with the storyboard. That's the whole trick. Yeah. Okay. And we did it in 6 minutes, so we didn't do too badly there. Very simple GUI though. Okay. So like I say, there's plenty more examples in my Java videos on my YouTube. Plenty of examples there. I'd have to say there would be at least 100 examples of GUI programming on there where I'm solving tutorial questions or sample exam questions and developing full solutions to them in the video. Okay, so definitely have a work through those. And we also talk to Farzad and see if we can get to do some in the workshop that's coming up, but that's to be confirmed. Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. We've got 10 people here still. Thanks to Jared and Damien and Kurt and Andrew and Wayne for joining in. I think I got everyone. So most people joined in a bit anyway, so that was good. So thanks for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you. And get lots of practice. And if you find the assignment too hard, break it down. Just try and solve one little part of it. Even get that working as a little console app and then come back and add what you've learned into your main assignment. Break it down, solve each little part individually. That's the key to doing it. Okay, one new message. Okay, thanks for your time. Have a good week and good luck with the assignment. Maybe see you in the workshop as well.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mike.
No worries. Have a nice week.